One of the reasons that you've cited is, of course, the international community's reaction. And you've also written about what happened in 1947 when India took the Kashmir problem to the United Nations. But now, and of course, that has been a problem. Everyone's viewed it as a mistake of having taken it over there. I don't know what your views are, but we'll skip that for now because I want to ask you about other things. The fact is that the world has changed hugely since 1947. Today, if there is a terrorist attack, the world views a response to a terrorist attack very differently from a Kashmir, Pakistan, India dispute. Because this was clearly a terrorist attack. And why would the world opinion not be supportive of India retaliating to that?
I think your goal is not opinion, to create opinion in your favor. I mean, your goal is not to be liked. Your goal is to create outcomes. And the outcome you are seeking is an outcome where cross-border terrorism stops, where you've eliminated the sources of this. And frankly, it's very hard to argue that a series of military attacks and the escalation that goes with it is actually going to achieve those goals.
But could, say, the United States have thought that if they go after Osama bin Laden, there would be a worse backlash, so we better not get him?
Well, I'm not sure whether there would be a worse backlash but I think that is proof that just taking out one leader or another really doesn't eliminate the organization. In fact, sometimes, as you said, it changes the nature of the organization, makes it harder to deal with. I mean, you know, if you look at Al-Qaeda, the original pack of 52 names, you know, of leaders, most of them are gone. There's very few left. And yet Al-Qaeda not only exists, but has spread and is much more dangerous today than it was originally. So I think there are limits to the, if your goal is to create opinion, that's a different issue, but that's not what I think is the goal of the state. Because each opinion is something that people will come to based on their own calculation of their interest, rather than how justified or correct you were.
Now, one of the most interesting things that you have written about Pakistan Army's lessons from the Kargil War. And it seems that if the lessons learned by the Pakistan Army from Kargil were wrong, the Army's practice suggests it may have drawn a more dangerous conclusion still. The Pakistan Army seems to believe that Pakistan's nuclear shield permits Pakistan to undertake terrorist attacks on India without fear of retaliation. This may well have figured in the Pakistan Army's calculations behind the Mumbai attack of November 26, 2008. The Pakistan Army could believe that its nuclear threats in '87 during the brass tacks exercises and during the 1990 Kashmir crisis worked and prevented Indian military retaliation. So what you're saying here again is that if Pakistan understands or misunderstands,
it's dangerous.
Yes, and if they understand our restraint as...
If they misread it as weakness, it's dangerous.
And isn't that what's happened?
No, I don't think so. Because we have managed, after both went overtly nuclear in 1998, to create periods of relative peace and actually calm. If you look at the actual figures, from 2004 onwards, until actually 2014, the cross-border ceasefire violations went down steadily. In fact, there was no firing in 2005 to 2006 across the line of control or the border. Cross-border infiltration steadily declined. Deaths due to terrorist activity in J&K and elsewhere actually kept going down steadily. Security forces, civilians and militants killed. All those numbers kept declining. So you have managed periods of relative peace. Partly because you used a combination of means. You not only talked to Pakistan, but you also did other things on the line. You did various things. And you had an internationally supportive environment in the global war on terror. So you did manage for periods to do that. And I think we need to look at that as well. How did you manage those periods of peace? How did you manage to actually control it and keep it at a manageable level? You never eliminated it. but you got it down to levels where you could live with it, and where the situation within Kashmir, for instance, was very peaceful. There were years when, and where tourism went back, when life became normal. So there are ways of doing this, and you can actually convey the message. But the passage that you've read is in the context of a discussion of no first use of nuclear weapons in our doctrine. And our doctrine that if you even think of using, if you use nuclear weapons in any form, tactical, strategic, whatever you want to call it, against us, you will face massive nuclear retaliation. So, and that is
But
where,
on the other hand, you
so
say that
what
Pakistan
that
trusts
does
we
is-
won't.
No, what it does is, no, it's not that it doesn't believe in your massive retaliation. It believes in your massive retaliation. What it does is it lowers the threshold for conventional war, and then it thinks that it can do other things below. But nuclear weapons are not the answer to terrorism. You can't use nuclear weapons against terrorists, against little groups of 3-5 people who come across, certainly not on your own territory. Nuclear weapons for us are not a war-fighting weapon. They're a weapon to prevent other people from using their nuclear weapons to blackmail us and to threaten us, as they used to. I mean,
But, you know,
all those instances are before we went overtly nuclear that you mentioned in that. But if you want to deal with terrorism, you have to deal with terrorism at its own level. If you want to deal with a conventional war, you have to deal with that at a different level. So for each of those, you need to have your own answers across the whole spectrum of violence. And that you have to do separately.
But isn't that a contradiction? Because as you've written and you're saying...
No, if they think so, it's wrong, which is why you do things to convince them that it's not. And you have managed that successfully for periods in the past. You have convinced them that that's wrong. They tried Kargil, thinking they had nuclear weapons. In '98, they'd announced it. They tried Kargil. What happened? Failed. They thought they could do other things. You saw terrorism in 2000, the attack of Parliament, 2001. And yet, after 2003, through a combination of things that you did manage to bring it down. So you did manage, there are ways of dealing with it.
But all these attacks, the Parliament attack, 26/11, doesn't it feel like you brought it down?
Look at the numbers. Look at the numbers on the MHA website. Look at the South Asia Terrorism Portal website.
But those
The numbers
shouldn't have
speak for
happened at
themselves.
all.
This is what I'm saying. You never managed to eliminate it. And that is partly because of structural, institutional, other factors on the Pakistani side, which frankly I think are beyond us to fix right now. So I've said in the book that I think that's a protracted problem. That's not a problem you can fix today. It's not a happy thought, but it's, unfortunately it's there.
Reading what you've written about everything about the nuclear stuff, it's scary. I'm scared for my grandchildren.
It's a huge responsibility, which is why you need to do it responsibly.
More than responsibility. I mean, this one. What this means is that Pakistan will build many more nuclear warheads.
Well, they've said
and
they
that
will.
use of these so-called tactical weapons will be devolved to several low-ranking officers at the battlefield
This is why we
level.
say it's so dangerous what they say they're going to do, which is to have many more small
Yes.
weapons. And we keep saying this is very dangerous. They shouldn't be doing this.
But there must be something more to be done than just saying they should. The decision
No, but
to
the
use
answer
these
to
weapons will
that-
be in the hands of many more young officers in an army that is increasingly religiously motivated and less professional.
Yes, but the
this
answer
is scary
to that
stuff.
is not. The answer to that is not that because he's doing something stupid, you should do the same stupid thing.
No,
Because if you both threaten first use, then you both have an interest actually in doing it first. And you actually increase the incentives to use those weapons. Which is why we have a much more responsible doctrine in no first use.
yes, but can you explain Pakistan's doctrine? Because it says
See,
they will
Pakistan-
use it without.
Unlike us, Pakistan regards nuclear weapons as one more weapon which they will actually use in fighting a war. Secondly, they think they are under conventional inferiority to India. That conventionally, if they fight a straightforward conventional war, and it's true, they've lost all the wars so far against India.
Not
And the
if you
last
read
one-
Pakistani history books.
Well, but they know the truth. I mean, the Pakistan army is not foolish. They know what happened in '71. They know. So to compensate for that conventional inferiority, they say they will use nuclear weapons very quickly. And they talk of first use of nuclear weapons. In a sense, that's also what NATO used to say, because they thought they had conventional inferiority vis-a-vis Warsaw Pact, Soviet Union. So they also had tactical nuclear weapons in Europe. But deterrence held right through the Cold War in their case. And so far, deterrence has held with us also. And if you think of it, we haven't fought a large-scale conventional war now since 1971. But it's important that you keep examining deterrence and making sure that it's there, that the fear of the consequences is there in the mind of your adversary, so that he's not tempted to do something silly.
When you think that their nuclear capability is so loosely protected or not protected,
they will tell you no, but yes, it's true. It is very worrying.
The Americans have spoken about
it's the only nuclear weapon program which is in the hands entirely of a military.
Then shouldn't the international community, considering that a lot of the terrorism is exported from Pakistan, shouldn't the international community be doing something about that?
I think they should. And I really think they should, but I don't think they know what to do.
Well, I mean, you're the expert, but there are so many different options to put pressure on a government. But that's another question I wanted to ask you.
But these are weapons which, the nuclear weapons in Pakistan are under army control and army management, and the army runs that program. And this is part of the problem, that you're dealing with so many Pakistans all at the same time.
Why do you deal with puppet prime ministers and negotiators when nobody listens to them? The real people who are doing everything in Pakistan's exporting of terrorism are ISI and the army. Why don't you speak to them?
Well, it depends on what you want to do. If you think of the poor, ordinary civil society, the ordinary Pakistani, he has no real animus against you. Pakistani businessmen, they're quite happy to do business, and they do it through Dubai, wherever. Pakistani civilian politicians, yes and no. Most of them, frankly, are not. Your problem is really with the ISI, the Pakistan Army, jihadi tanzeems, and some of the extreme religious right and so on. So you have to run different policies with each of them. If you want to deal with terrorism, as you say, then you have to address these people and change their behavior if you can. And if you can find a way, wonderful. But I don't see why you should make everybody else pay for these people's behavior.
It's a waste of time, and you keep having dialogues and meetings with prime ministers and their delegations.
It's not necessarily a waste of time, because what you want to prevent is a consolidation of everybody behind those, your enemies, those who have real animus against you in Pakistan.
But as you were explaining, that if the Pakistan Army and ISI are the ones who are the problems, then every discussion or negotiation that you have with their ministries is simply negated.
No, it depends on what you're doing with them. If you're doing other things which are apart from terrorism, then you do it with other people.
Yes, that's all right, but what are we going to do about terrorism?
About terrorism, as I said, today you have to contain it, you have to counter it where you can, you have to make sure that you harden yourself, and you have to make sure that you get into the minds of those who actually create this, who are the groups that you mentioned.
So do you think it's possible at all?
I think it's a long, protracted issue. It's something that you can't settle overnight, not right away.
You've written about Israeli political scientists, Inbar and Shamir, on what they talk about mowing the grass.
Which you have to keep doing it, but that doesn't mean the grass goes away. The grass will still grow. You still have to keep cutting it down. And you achieve temporary periods of peace, but it's not permanent. It's not a permanent solution. There is no one-shot solution to this kind of, as long as Pakistan is the way she is, as long as the institutional interest of the Pakistan Army is what it is, as long as Pakistan is structured the way she is, there is no immediate short-term solution to this. All this can change, hopefully it will change, but right now it's hard to foresee.
Would you think of changing our tactics by, like,
no,
for example,
the
Narendra Modi?
tactics are not going to solve a strategic problem. At the tactical level, you can go on changing, doing whatever you want. add some unpredictability if you want. In fact, you should be at the tactical level. But that's not going to either remove the roots of the problem or solve it at the strategic level. And when we say it's a protracted problem, that we're talking at the strategic level.
What do you think of the surgical strikes that took place in September?
Well, I don't think they were surgical strikes. They were preemptive attacks
reported by the government
against terrorist launch pads in self-defense along the line. I think that's really what they were.
Did they really happen?
No? I'm sure they happened. They must have done something. And these kinds of things happen along that line. I mean, they have happened in the past. I'm sure they'll happen in the future as well. The difference is this time they chose to go public.
So you think this was made public it was planted in the media to build up and react to public sentiment that was asking for some kind of retaliation to Uri?
You see, the problem with going public is not so much whether it suits public sentiment or not. And there I think that is exaggerated actually. The problem is if you go public, then he has to go public as well. He has to show that he's not cowed down by whatever you've done. So it becomes an escalatory cycle. He will then do something and it'll be known. Then you will have to do something. So where does this end? As Gandhiji used to say, the trouble with an eye for an eye is that it ends up making the world blind. So you need to, if you don't go public, he has the option then to climb down, to actually control what is happening and to limit whatever, infiltration, cross-border terrorism, etc. So there is a problem with going public which is more than just public opinion. You said, oh, this was to meet public opinion. You know, if you think of it, after 26/11, within 6 months we had a general election. When one political party tried to raise it towards the end of January 2009 in their campaign meetings, 26/11, what did the government do, etc. I think the reaction they got from the public was so negative, saying, how can you play politics with a national tragedy? This is wrong. That they never raised it again after raising it twice. And it's remarkable, it was not even an issue in a general election within 6 months of 26/11. Why? Because I think the Indian public are wise. Because they're not so simple that you can just create opinion and mislead them. And I think they know what their real interest is, if you explain it to them. If you talk to them, tell them. And there are times when leaders have to be leaders, when they need to explain things to the public. And that's, I think, really important.
Now going back to this September.
So this idea that somehow, the public, they demand and this was just a response, I don't buy that.
Then why did they play it up so big?
I think they chose to treat it as a domestic political gain. Now this is where, you see, it's normal in a democracy that you will argue about foreign policy, that you discuss everything that you do. I think that's a good thing, actually. There must be critical examination. It's a different thing that you take a foreign policy decision or a security decision in order to create some domestic political gain. Because what you should be taking those decisions for is the outcome that you seek, is your national interest. It can't be part of a political calculation of, will it help me in an election or will it do something else?
So which was this?
I have no idea. I wasn't in the room. I don't know on what basis they took the decision.
But you're saying that these strikes take place all the time. It's not unusual.
What I'm saying is that it's the public element of it that you need to think through very carefully.
But it's never been built up like this before.
No.
Which sort of points to the fact that it was done for domestic consumption.
Maybe they didn't know the past. Maybe the new in government, it's the first time. So they made the statements. Or maybe they did make the calculation. I don't know. I can't tell.
Your assessment of Narendra Modi's government so far in foreign policy has not been very positive.
No, it's actually most of their policy is actually a continuation of previous policy.
Mm-hmm. And he's actually been quite a busy man. He's accomplished quite a bit.
That's true. He's been busy.
All right. What does that imply?
I think the problem with continuing old policy is good, I think, up to a point. When the situation changes, you need to change with it. You need to adjust policies.
Well, he's isolated Pakistan in SAARC, which was never done
Pakistan
by
was
the
isolated
UPA.
after 26/11. There are times when, I mean, the Islamabad summit in 2004 took place after a long gap, don't forget. And it was a very similar gap. I mean, we've done that. SAARC has gone through its own ups and downs. And isolation, if you want to look at, Pakistan was truly isolated after 26/11 in 2009, 10. Certainly, I think we'd achieved that. But that's not a goal in itself. That's supposed to lead to an outcome which actually you want. My own problem is more fundamental, that if you look at the world economy, you look at the nature of regimes around you, they've all changed everywhere, in China, in Turkey, in the US, and if you look at the situation around you, it's much more complex than it was before. So I think it's really time that you need to start looking at how do you adjust policy, how do you deal with it. And that I'm not sure has happened yet. So because then you become reactive to events, and without a strategic framework, you don't have any way of judging what is important, where do I apply my effort, where do I not apply my effort, what is going to make a difference.
But aren't they doing that in terms of where it serves India's economic interests?
I haven't seen a clear statement of strategic vision or direction. On economic interests, for instance, you just had the death of TPP, which was a whole attempt by the US to change, and you're watching the fragmentation of the globalized economy, basically, where trade, investment flowed freely. Today, RCEP is being negotiated. We need to get out there and make it clear what kind of global economic framework we really think is in our interest. And if we think an open international trading system is, which it is, I mean, we did our best years were when the world was most globalized, then we really need to go out there and make it happen. It's not happening. And if you look at exports have declined steadily, your actual role in the global economy is roughly where it was in 2014. It hasn't changed. And your share in global trade, etc. Of course, you can say global trade itself has been declining or rising very slowly and much slower than. So you're in a whole deflationary global economy where the recovery from 2008 is very, very slow. So you have a different situation. And it's not enough to just keep saying and doing what you used to before the 2008 crisis. That's an example of where you really need to adjust to the new realities. And now with the Trump administration coming, you have to see what you're going to do. You have big issues with the US on IPRs, on pharma, on immigration and visas, for instance, all of which are
Do you think
priorities.
that there is a possibility that there's some agreements that Trump may not support, say the last one?
Well, it's quite possible. I don't know what he'll do because he has no record of public service and he's not necessarily very consistent in what he says either. So I think we really, right now, we should just wait and watch what they do. But I think we need to be very clear in this situation about what our core interests are. And one of them is a foreign economic policy which makes sense and which is consistent and has a reasonable chance of success in this kind of global economy.
But as a layperson, as a journalist just reading without the knowledge in depth of what comes out of these agreements, if you just look at the reports that the trips that Modi has taken and the agreements that have come out of it with each country, it seems to be that he is far more active than Manmohan Singh ever was.
Well,
Manmohan Singh had his one success.
In his first year, he traveled about the same as Dr. Manmohan Singh did in his first year as Prime Minister. In his second and now in his third year, halfway through, he is traveling more. But most of them are a continuation of policy. And I think in a situation like this, where the world uncertainty has gone up, where the world economy is not doing well, I think we really need to do much more with our immediate neighbors, with Nepal, with Bangladesh, with Sri Lanka, and I think we really need to concentrate on a little bit more on them.
Mr. Menon, you were our envoy to Sri Lanka, and you were involved, I think, during the Indian peacekeeping force policy, or you were too young then?
I wasn't there.
So, you have written about Rajiv Gandhi's policy for Sri Lanka, and he paid for it with his life. The fact is that at that time there was very little coverage in the Indian media about how many soldiers, Indian soldiers, had given up their lives in Sri Lanka for this cause. In fact, there was a story that one of our reporters stumbled on in a Pune hospital and saw our soldiers with their legs blown off or their arms and severely lost their eyesight, all kinds of injuries, and over 1,600 deaths, I believe. Do you think this was a kind of an American format, that for a political policy, our soldiers go and die in another country?
Well, I think what they did was probably necessary at that time. But it's true, I don't think we have given the IPKF and the soldiers especially the sort of public attention and respect that I think they deserve. Because after all, they not just obeyed their orders, but actually paid a huge price for it. You said the casualties, but then also the wounded, the maimed, those whose lives were affected the rest of their lives. I'm glad that finally in the recent past, actually in 2008, they have put up a memorial to the IPKF in Colombo, near the Independence Monument, in a very prominent place. And that Indian dignitaries who have been going to Sri Lanka since then have been going there and paying their respects and so on. But I really think it's one of the chapters where I think we need to recognize not just the valor, but the sheer sacrifice of our own men and what they did.
But they were not defending our country.
I think they were defending India's fundamental interest.
Political interests.
Not our political interest, our fundamental security interests. If you think of Sri Lanka, it's an unsinkable aircraft carrier 14 miles off the coast of India. It's very important.
That's very patronizing to Sri Lanka to see them as an aircraft carrier for India.
But that's what it is in terms of security, if you calculate. Therefore, it's very important that Sri Lanka be a friend. And you must work at making sure that Sri Lanka stays a friend. It's in India's interest to do so.
So it is a political policy.
It's not
our soldiers lost their lives for a political policy.
It's India's security interest. That's India's security.
Isn't it?
Not really, no. If you have a hostile force in Sri Lanka, it affects your interest directly.
But there was a civil war.
It was more than just a civil war. It was a war of separatism, which could have had effects across the straits on your side. It also created conditions which opened Sri Lanka up to outside interference and presence. So you took a considered judgment, and I think at that time, in those circumstances, I think the right judgment to intervene. Now, the fact that Sri Lankan politics were very complicated and therefore their own opinion of that went up or down or favorable to unfavorable to favorable again, that's a different issue. But I do think it served India's interests, and I do think that we shouldn't lose sight of the fundamentals, which is that your soldiers went there and served your national interest, and I don't think they've got the recognition that they deserved.
Since you did bring it up in terms of whether war should be used or not, and you've written about Clausewitz's theory on...
that war is a continuation of politics. By
yes,
means.
That's the one. Okay. You said that war, that violence and military force doesn't always achieve mostly...
But there are times when
except in time... You didn't address Khalistan in Punjab.
Yeah.
In that force worked?
It worked. That's what I'm saying. There are times when it works. But there are times also when it doesn't work.
Well, we're seeing it not work in Kashmir.
Yeah.
Why is it not working in Kashmir?
Well, I think in the Khalistan case, one is the way in which you applied force was successful, but two, you also applied it in a context where there was economic development, there was social change, and it was a vibrant society which had a life of its own. In the Jammu and Kashmir case, unfortunately, in a sense, actually, militancy has become an industry. It's become a way of life. And it's actually got an economy of its own going as well, which you prevented successfully in Punjab. because there was so much more to life in Punjab. I mean, there was, Punjab was an economic success. Secondly, the level of state sponsorship and support that it has got in Jammu and Kashmir, and the nature of the place, the terrain, ethnic, etc., I think all that has made it much more complicated for you in Jammu and Kashmir. But you're right, there are instances where force works. I mean, Khalistan was one, but there are others. Sri Lanka was one, where the LTT was eliminated. There are places, but state sponsorship across the border actually makes it much more difficult. In Khalistan, we were fortunate in managing to deal with that.
Somehow this whole thing of the UPA's approach to Pakistan particularly, for a layperson, when one discussed it with people working within the government, there always seemed to be this response that we will not stoop to their level. There seemed to be this very pompous, self-righteous, that we're not violent people, we are... That's my opinion.
Yeah,
I'm entitled to that.
Maybe some people are like that.
And there was this sort of...
I'm not questioning your opinion.
Yeah, there's real comfort in not doing anything other than we will continue to have dialogue, we will continue to negotiate.
I think we did more than just
yes.
talk. And I think the proof is in the pudding. You look at the numbers, as I said. You look at what was achieved. I think that is the real proof of what. Why do you do all this?
It's kind of demoralizing for the people of India to have something like 2611 happen and nothing is done.
I'm not sure. As I said, you ask the people of India, they voted them back into power in 6 months.
Maybe for other
reasons. For the chattering classes, I think yes, what you say is right.
हमें chattering classes में डाल दिया.
No, but we are.
Let's face it. You're the one who lives in this cloud.
No, we are the chattering classes, whether we like it or not. We're the ones who, go around writing articles, making speeches.
Right now, President Obama has ordered an investigation into the possible hacking of the American election. And you've also written a great deal on cyber war and how things have, now there's a new reality. Do you think, one, is India equipped to deal with this kind of a new way of functioning, working, even maybe having foreign policy through Twitter?
We've done, foreign policy through Twitter and public diplomacy using social media, I think we were among the first. In fact, MEA was one of the quickest. Back in 2005 when Shamsaran actually started the public diplomacy division and so on. But on the broader issue of cybersecurity, the National Security Council actually started looking at this issue as far back as 2002. It was one of the first issues that it started trying to organize. Now, are we where we want to be? No. I mean, there's always much more that we're better off than we were certainly when we started, and there is a national cybersecurity policy which was adopted in 2013 May. There is a framework of recommendations. There are different bits and pieces in place. Different people know what they should be doing. I can't say now how much is actually being implemented. And second problem is that the field keeps changing. It develops the threat itself develops so quickly that we're still learning how to think about the problem. What is a threat? Which ones are serious threats? Is somebody defacing a website, is that a serious threat or not? To my mind, that really doesn't matter. I mean, that's, and that's not the real threat. The real threat is people getting at your data, also changing processes and actually creating kinetic effects by getting into your networks, into sensitive networks and so on. Changing the picture that you see. I mean, those are really dangerous. I can't speak with assurance anymore because I'm not involved. But I do think that we have the capability, we have the talent, we have the people in India, and it's really a question of organizing and coordinating that effort and getting it together. Because the problem with cybersecurity is it's everybody's problem, but nobody's problem. Nobody is responsible for this. You can't say here's one person who does, and it affects the whole range of not just government, individuals, industry, You have critical national information infrastructure which is supposed to be protected, and there are institutions to do that. But you know, no industry wants to be managed also, and nobody wants to admit that they are at risk. And so it's a difficult job. You need to learn to work with all kinds of people, with the private sector, outside government. Within government, I think some of the most sensitive networks and so on we have hardened relatively successfully, and that's an easier job in one way. So we go from the known to the unknown, and we start with the most sensitive ones, harden them, work our way out. In the meantime, work with, because basic telecom networks, all these things are in private hands, so we need to work with others. And I think the work has started. But I can't say, yes, 100%, don't worry, we're safe. That I won't say, and I don't think you ever should, because you don't know what's out there, what you don't know.
You've written in your book that personalities matter in terms of prime ministers and presidents. You've worked with Narasimha Rao, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, Manmohan Singh. Incidentally, you know, a large part of the book, as I read it, I kept reading and thinking he's not telling me anything of the backstory. There is no inside story. You are known to be a secret, a very. I remember your wife telling me that if I ask him if he's coming home for lunch, and he dodges that even.
No.
So you have not, unlike many other people who've written recent books.
It's not a memoir. It's not meant to
Okay,
be.
but even then, unlike a lot of other people who have written books, who have given the inside story of how policy is played out, how politics is played out, whether it's Natwar Singh or Sanjay Baru or even somebody like Dulat, which I interviewed him and I was quite surprised at all that he gave away. You haven't given an inch. And I think that's grossly unfair.
I assume that's a compliment.
No, it's not a compliment.
No, frankly.
Do not take it as a compliment. When you write a book, you're supposed to give information.
I won't. I'm not going to write that kind of book because I don't think that's fair. And I don't think it's right. For a very simple reason. The way it works is you give honest advice in that room, knowing that it will stay within that room. If you suspect that this advice is tomorrow going to be discussed out in the street, and they say, he said this thing and she said that and so thought that, then you can't give honest advice. Then you give advice that you don't mind being printed in the newspapers tomorrow. And there is therefore a trust between those who, in these jobs, when you're called upon to take or participate in decisions like this, there is a trust that you can't betray. And I think it's actually a betrayal of that trust. It also destroys the ability of government to work the way it should. If you can no longer give honest advice within government and say, I think this is foolish for the following reasons, without tomorrow being quoted saying in the public. So I'm not going to write a book like that. And I think most memoirs actually are self-serving. And which is why I find them quite irritating, especially this sort of contemporary tell-all memoir. That, you know,
you glorify yourself.
I mean, I've never heard people say, you know, I was such a fool. Have you? I haven't seen it. I mean, it's so I really that's one thing I swore I wouldn't end up doing that kind of book. And I'm
Could
sorry.
you at least tell us a funny moment with any of these prime ministers that you had? One funny moment.
Well, let's see. I'll think of something.
With
later,
Manmohan
maybe.
Singh?
Well, he actually had a good sense of humor. But anyway, that's let him tell you.
Any slip-ups?
Slip-ups? Yeah, I mean, we all make small mistakes.
Just tell us a one time where all of you just could not stop laughing.
Well, let me think about it. I'll tell you later.
Not later, on camera. Kuch to bolo.
camera,
See,
yeah.
You proved my point.
Exactly. See?
So it wasn't a compliment.
So
Stop taking it as that.
You also proved my point.
But Maya Angelou said, the greatest agony is the untold story within you. Will you ever tell the stories?
No.
Sorry. You know,
I'm sorry, but that I don't think is right.
In News Laundry, we have, you've written in your book that you are an old-fashioned patriot.
Have I?
Yes. You have.
Yeah.
Towards the end of the book, the end of it, that you are I haven't underlined it because it was just a passing thing you've written, that you are an old-fashioned patriot. In News Laundry, we have a patriotic test. Will you take it?
Happily.
Totally.
Try it, yeah.
You're nimble on your feet.
No, I don't
You've
think
been
so.
on.
I'm just an
You've
old
been in
retired
national
bureaucrat.
security.
I'm just a retired
Are you
old
ready?
bureaucrat. I'm ready. Let's hear. So we're supposed to stand up?
What are your instincts?
To stand up and sing with it.
Okay, no, you didn't pass because you had to ask me.
What?
You should have just stood up instinctively. Oh, sorry. I went into ragtime. Last question. Do you think it should be played in movie halls?
Frankly, I'm quite happy if it's played. I don't see that some great infringement of anyone's rights. I'm quite happy to stand up and sing with.
And people who don't stand up, does it offend you?
No, it doesn't actually, because it's up to them. My problem is, I don't think you can compel people to show respect. But I do, I wonder about people who choose not to stand up for their own national anthem. I mean, that is true. I wouldn't think, highly of anybody who chooses not to. But, there are people who can't stand up. I mean, who might have physical disability, have other reasons not to. That's their business.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr.
Thank
Menon.
you. Thank you very much.
If you like that, click here to support us and down here to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and do check out the other stuff we do, like News Laundry interviews, Why So Serious, animations, comics, panel discussions, podcasts which are really big, and much, much more.